Good evening. We'd like to welcome everyone to the North Jackson Church of Christ for our Wednesday evening Bible study. If you're a visitor, you're our honored guest, and hopefully you can stay for a few minutes for us to get to know you better. Before we're dismissed to our Bible classes, we'll be in a devotional portion, starting off with a song. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their songs of sweetest praise drip back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore.
In the land of Judah, in a very dark time, there was the death of a king. His name was Ahaziah. And when Ahaziah died, his mother, Athaliah, not to get confused with the names, Athaliah decided she wanted power. And when she wanted power, she would do anything to get it. And to do so, she had to eliminate the competition. And by eliminating the competition, she chose to have all of her grandchildren executed, massacred, however you want to say it. They were all put to death, except for one. And his name was Joash, a little baby boy, 1 year old. He was saved by a woman named Jehoshaphat. Yeah, I got to get them right. She was the wife of Jehoiada. Jehoiada is my second favorite person in the Bible, just so you know. But Jehoiada and Jehoshabeath saved Joash and raised him for the next 6 years. And in the 7th year of Joash's life, Jehoiada took courage and said, this woman, Athaliah, who's the queen, we're going to have a revolt against her. And she is no longer going to be the queen because she has taken our nation and worshiped other gods and made it wicked and made it vile. So we're going to change things. And so Jehoiada devised a strategy and held a coup, and it was very successful. And when Athaliah found out that this coup was happening, she ran into the temple shouting, treason, treason, and Jehoiada had her put to death. But she was taken out of the temple because we don't put people to death inside the temple. And so Joash was made king at 7 years old. And Joash continued to grow. And this is in 2 Chronicles 23, 24, and 2 Kings 11 and 12, the story of Joash. And as he continued to grow, we see evidence that he had great faith as he repaired the temple. And Jehoiada continued, because, it's a 7-year-old. They're not going to make that many decisions about the kingdom. Jehoiada made great strides in leading the nation of Israel and getting rid of Baal worship and getting rid of idols and making a commitment to God. And so, as time goes on and as time passes, everything is great. And Jehoiada lives to the ripe old age of 130. And then he dies and he's buried in the tomb of the kings because he is so loved by the people. But when he dies, everything turns, everything changes for the worse. When Jehoiada dies, Joash listens to other men, princes who came and paid homage to him and flattered him and led him to worship other gods, the Asherim and idols. And God didn't want that to happen. So he sent prophet after prophet to go say, hey, we don't need to do these things. We don't need to worship these idols. And Joash continued to reject these prophets up until the point where God sent a man named Zechariah. Zechariah was the flesh and blood son of his adopted father, Jehoiada. So they were brothers. They were raised. I don't know how old the difference was in age, but they were brothers. And when Zechariah told Joash to change his ways, Joash had him stoned in the temple. A complete reversal of what he was and the situation that it was when Jehoiada was around. And so I look at this story and I read this story and I wonder to myself, where did everything go wrong? Why was the life of Joash so sad in the end? Because he ended up being executed by his own servants because they despised what he did to the son of Jehoiada that much, that he was killed by his own servants. And so why did his life end in tragedy? Why did his life end in tragedy? And I, very simply put, would make the case that even though Jehoiada was a great man who served the Lord and led Israel into a time of following God, even though he did all those things, I would make the case that he did not do very well in raising up and cultivating the next generation. Because if you look and if you remember the parable of the sower in Matthew 13, where there's this seed that's thrown into the field and it's among the thorns, those that are among the thorns, why did they not grow? They were choked out. And Jesus later explains in the chapter that it's because of the riches and the pleasures of this world that they decided that they didn't really, the seeds don't really decide to die, but they got choked out, and that's why their faith got squashed, I guess you could say, or defeated. And we could say that's something like Joash. And so I think to myself, how can I not be like Jehoiada? How do I make it so that my own kids, hopefully, Lord willing, my own kid is someone who's in the good soil? Someone who is cultivated well, so that when I die or my kids leave me, they are not like Joash, who changes everything as soon as they see other people. And I'm going to, tell you a bunch of things like, put a fire hose in your face and tell you a bunch of things all at once because we don't have the time. But I would make the case that if you want someone to be well cultivated, whether they be young, whether they be old, you do these things. You have to get this person to commit to going to church. And that's found in Hebrews 10:25. And you have to get them to connect to other people. You have to get them to, as it says in Titus 2:2-6, it talks about the older women teaching the younger women, the older men teaching the younger men. There has to be some sort of relationship that isn't just with your peers that are in your age. You have to grow in some way, shape, or form. In Hebrews 5:12-14, it talks about moving on from milk to solid food. And how some of you ought to be teachers by now, but now you're still drinking milk and you should have moved on to solid food. And so you have to continually grow if you want to be well cultivated so that you don't turn out like Joash. You have to serve in some way. Jesus continually served others. And when he washed the disciples' feet and said, you are to be a servant, for the last shall be first, the first shall be last. He wanted us to serve. So if you want to be well cultivated, or if you want your children to be well cultivated, they must serve. And then lastly, they must tell others about Christ. They have to, as the Great Commission says in Mark 16:15, go out into all the world and tell and make disciples of all nations. It is our responsibility to make sure that all of these things are fulfilled so that we can say that our children are well cultivated. They are in the good soil so that they do not turn out like Joash. Because, and I say all these things because if you look at Moses and Joshua, and after them and then their generation died, what happened? The nation of Israel did what was wise in their own eyes. You look at the ebbs and flows of the nation of Israel, the nation of Judah, and how they just went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and loving God and not loving God. That's because cultivating the next generation does not happen by accident. It is something that you must work towards and something you must be focused on. And if you are not, it will come and, I guess, punch you in the teeth, or however you want to phrase it. And I believe that this church does that very well. But this is something that is always on my mind, something that I'm always thinking about, is how do we cultivate the next generation? So, if you have some sin that you would like to confess before the church, if there is some reason that you want to come before the church, whether it be to be baptized and to put on Christ through baptism for the remission of your sins, you are very welcome to do so. And you can do that as we stand and as we sing.
Is cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from the riven side which flows be of sin the double cure. Cleanse me from its guilt and power. Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to the cross I cling. Naked come to thee for dress, helpless look to thee for grace. Thy light to the fountain fly. Wash me, Savior, or I die. Please be seated.
Thank you, Brother Luke, for an excellent lesson tonight. And again, visitors, thank you so much for being here with us today. If you haven't already done so, as a visitor, somebody handed you one. Look on the back of the pew in front of you and fill out one of those blue attendance cards. We'd appreciate that. And pass it to the aisles. Of course, members use the light post or the white card. Just a few announcements here. North Jackson, as you know, we announced last Sunday, is getting a resource shipment together to go to Suzdak, Guyana. Brother Sheik Welcome and his wife Roxanne are working down there, and this literature will be shared among the churches there in Guyana. And we'd like for everyone to consider donating to that. As you go out the front doors here, on the left side is the list that you can look at. It's quite extensive, but it names several things that we'd like to have that will be sent to them. And if you have any more information or questions, you can see me or Brother David Beach or Brother Michael Wilson. Couldn't think of the name. But see them and sign up by Sunday, June the 8th if you want to donate and help with that. Be sure and make it by then. The Mimims and Muffins will be learning some basic crocheting. This is Saturday, May the 24th in the Fellowship Hall. If you have more questions or anything, see Sister Kimberly Witt for this. And there is a four-year bulletin board also that you can look at. Tweens and their families are invited to a cookout and a devotional in the church pavilion out here. This is Saturday, May the 24th, and they ask that you check on the bulletin board and indicate what items that you may be able to bring. And it's a GroupMe app that you can check in on by Friday the 23rd. And if you have any questions, see Brother Chris or Sister Mary Ramey for that. Volunteers are needed to provide lunches for the Tween Week that's coming up Tuesday, May the 27th through that Friday the 30th. And if you can help with this, there's a bulletin board that you can sign. Also, Brother Luke here will have more details if you need any questions answered. That's all I have. We'll have our closing song. Brother Dwayne Waddle will lead our closing prayer. Let's all stand.
Pray with me, please. Loving, gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight thanking you, Lord, for the many blessings of our lives, Lord, for waking us up this morning, for the health that we enjoy, Lord, for this wonderful congregation of believers. We thank you, Lord, for your Son, most importantly, for his sacrifice, his life that he lived, the hope that we have in him, Lord, through obedience and baptism, the remission of our sins, Lord, that we know and we are assured that we can live with you forever. Dear Lord, be with us through this rest of this evening, that we may be attentive in our classes, Lord, and listen and learn and do all we can, Lord, to increase in our knowledge. Lord, as we go home tonight, Lord, grant everybody here safety, Lord. Bless those, Lord, who are spiritually sick. Bless those, Lord, who are physically sick and struggling with recent illnesses or death. Lord, at the end of our lives, Lord, if we've lived a faithful life, Lord, grant us that home in heaven. And help us all to remember, Lord, when we wake up in the morning and when we lie down at night, that we are Christians. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
My latest sun is sinking fast, my race is nearly run. My strongest trials now are past, my triumph is begun. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snowy wings to my
Let's turn over to tonight. We're going to see if we can get through Joshua 16 and 17 as we cover the inheritance for the two sons of Joseph. Who are the two sons of Joseph, by the way? Good. Manasseh and Ephraim. Okay. Y'all are ready to go. Let's do our quiz. Of the original two spies, which two eventually lived in Canaan? All right, I know you know it, so just say it loud so I can hear you. Good. Joshua and Caleb. Excellent. Number 2, name a passage or an example from the Bible where fear is condemned. And remember, we're not saying that everything that's called fear in the Bible is a sin, because the reverence for the Lord is a virtue, and that's called fear. But there is a kind of fear that's condemned. That's what we discussed in class last week. So some passage or example in the Bible where fear is condemned. Okay, good. Revelation 21:8 says that all the fearful will have their part in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, and lists a bunch of other sins. And that one might strike you, because sometimes we tend to think that God doesn't have the right to dictate our emotions. And, of course, God has the right to dictate any part of our character or our being. But by the way, just what was the fear that we said? How did we characterize the fear last week that is condemned in the Bible? We said it's a mistrust of God. It's the belief that we are incapable of doing something that God says we're capable of doing with His help. So anytime God says you can do this, and then because of some pressure, some type of incentive to disbelieve, maybe it's a threat, maybe it's a perceived danger, or some consequence that seems really drastic to us, we say, I don't think I can do it. That's fear. And that's what's condemned. Where God says you can do it, and you say, you disagree with God, and you say, no, I can't. And maybe the easiest way to illustrate it is to think about times when we tell our children or our grandchildren, you can do this. And we know they can. It's something that they're perfectly capable of doing. But for some reason, they say, no, I can't do it, I can't do it. And that's one thing for an immature child, but for a grown-up, when God says you can do it, to say, no, I can't, that's wrong, isn't it? Okay, number 3. Among the original 12 spies, Caleb represented which tribe? Okay, good, Judah. And that is why his tribe would go first, in addition to the fact that he had already made arrangements with Moses to receive a particular section of land before Moses died. So this was all according to plan. Number 4, true or false? God promises that it always is theoretically possible to do the right thing, although one may lack the practical willingness to do it. Is that true or false? True, yes, it's possible. You may not see how you can see your way clear to do it, but it always is possible. And this runs counter to a doctrine that some people have taught, which is that God gives conflicting commands where there is no way to avoid sinning. Sometimes people will say life is such that you have to choose between the lesser of two evils, where both are evil. But that's not the case. It's always possible to do something that's not a sin. And we'll go into that more another time. That's not really our subject. But this is the principle that's in 1 Corinthians 10:13 and James 4:7. God doesn't expect us to do the impossible. So it's always possible to do the right thing. Number 5, last, true or false? God condemns natural apprehension or concern for one's own well-being. Okay, false. God, this would be God expecting the impossible for us. If He expected us to just lose all concern for our natural well-being. Like if we weren't concerned about getting killed, or we weren't apprehensive about suffering some kind of physical pain, or even emotional things like harsh criticism. If God dictated that we should never be concerned about people hating on us. Well, that's impossible. We can't help but have some concern about those matters. So God is not unreasonable about it, but God tells us the things that He expects. Okay, any question or wrap up from last week before we move ahead? Was there anything remaining? Okay, tonight we're on May 21st, and next week we'll try to get through chapters 18 and 19, and then the week after that will be the great chapter about the cities of refuge. That'll be the first Wednesday night in June. Although we may lose some of the ladies in our class to the ladies' summer series that begins in June, we won't hold that against you. But you can always go back and see our class on YouTube later if you want to go do the ladies' summer series in the other room, because there'll be special guest speakers for the ladies, and that'll be great. So we think you're making the wrong choice if you go in there. But no, just kidding. I think that would be great. But you can still see the class in here on YouTube if you want to. Remember, we're talking about the allotment of the 12 tribes, because chapters 1 through 12 is the conquering of the land, or chapters 1 through 11 really is the conquering of the land. And then chapters 12 through 24 covers the distribution or the allotment of the land, with Joshua's concluding speeches in chapters 23 and 24. So we're right in the middle of that. We've already seen the distribution to Judah, and now we're going to see the distribution to, we're going to call them the Josephites, but that comprises two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, but we'll refer to Ephraim and Manasseh separately, but joined together we call them the Josephites because they're the descendants of Joseph. Let's just cover some notes to help lay the groundwork before we get into the text. Remember that Jacob had adopted Ephraim and Manasseh, which allowed for him to give a double portion of everything to Joseph, in the sense that Joseph's sons were counted as receiving just as much inheritance as any of the other of the 12 sons of Jacob. Even though Ephraim and Manasseh were grandsons, they got two allotments. They're going to try to, what seems to be pulling a fast one on Joshua, to try to say they're only getting one allotment of land. They're going to try, people argue for more land and more possessions all the time. If there's some kind of a deal that's to be made where they think they can win Joshua's sympathy and get more property, they will sort of try to do that. The Josephite tribes don't turn out to be near the character that their dad, Joseph, had. But they were two tribes, and Joseph's territory is first drawn up as one allotment and then distributed between the two of them. And one of the main cities we're going to see is Gezer. And I put a bunch of things on here about Gezer, and you can follow up and read about it. It figures prominently in the opposition to Israel in the future. And that's because even though Joshua had killed the king of Gezer, and I suspect this is pretty typical for how things would go, is that Joshua took out the leadership so that it would cripple the opponent, and then would leave some of the conquering of the tribes, the Canaanite tribes, to the individual groups of Israel as they would settle the land. So Joshua did his part, but the cleanup afterward was not taken care of. And that bore terrible fruit in future generations of Israel. And that's just a lesson, a cautionary tale for those of us who are parents or grandparents, that if we don't get our own house in order, then that can be terrible consequences for future generations, even beyond what we may see. If we compromise a little bit on something that God says, then our children are going to know that. And then they're going to be willing to compromise even more because the line wasn't held. In other words, they learn the principle from us that God says such and such, but we don't take it all that seriously. We'll muddy it and say, well, we'll follow this command halfway, or we'll follow it somewhat, but not really all the way. Then what will our children do? they'll say, well, Mom and Dad didn't really care about that command. They didn't really keep it. They sort of pretended to keep it, but they didn't really keep it. And so we're not going to pay any attention to it whatsoever. Because if either it's binding or it's not. And if Mom and Dad didn't think it was binding, then we're not going to worry about it. And then they'll be liable to take things a lot further than Mom and Dad ever would. And I guess we've seen that play out in many cases over the years. But that's how it was, in the sense that here's a compromise. Maybe it didn't seem so bad. These Gezerites, they're under control. The idea is they'll do forced labor. So we're not going to let it get out of hand. We'll just compromise a little bit. But as you see throughout the rest of the Bible, David's fighting them, Solomon's fighting them, everybody's dealing with these people. And so we should say, whatever sin we can find in our household, let's nip it in the bud, get it out of there. Whatever compromises we've been making, get them out of there so that our children don't have to struggle with it in future years. Okay? And now, let's read Joshua 16 with that little introduction. This is maybe the shortest chapter. I haven't looked that out, but this is probably the shortest chapter in the book. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me, but I think it's the shortest chapter. Then the lot for the sons of Joseph went from the Jordan at Jericho to the waters of Jericho on the east into the wilderness, going up from Jericho through the hill country to Bethel. It went from Bethel to Luz and continued to the border of the Archites at Adaroth. It went down westward to the territory of the Japhletites, as far as the territory of lower Beth Horon, even to Gezer, and it ended at the sea. The sons of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, received their inheritance. Now this was the territory of the sons of Ephraim, according to their families. The border of their inheritance eastward was Adaroth Adar, as far as upper Beth Horon. Then the border went westward at Mikmethath on the north, and the border turned about eastward to Taanath Shiloh and continued beyond it to the east of Genoa. It went down from Genoa to Adaroth and to Naarah, and then reached Jericho and came out at the Jordan. From Tappuah, the border continued westward to the brook of Cana, and it ended at the sea. This is the inheritance of the tribe of the sons of Ephraim, according to their families, together with the cities which were set apart for the sons of Ephraim, in the midst of the inheritance of the sons of Manasseh, all the cities with their villages. But they did not, here's the key verse of the chapter, they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, which we just discussed. So the Canaanites live in the midst of Ephraim to this day, and they became forced laborers. That part about them becoming forced laborers shows you that the reasoning, the ethical reasoning that the Ephraimites were using was what we might call consequentialist reasoning or goal-based ethics, where they say, here is the end that we prefer, and whatever means are necessary to get there, we will justify based on the end. The ends justify the means. And that's always a bad way to reason. We should say, we'll do what's right. And there may be more or less advantageous ways of doing what's right. But that's called duty-based ethics as opposed to goal-based ethics. The Bible teaches you always do what's right. You never justify doing the wrong thing based on some good outcome you would prefer, based on something you would like to accomplish. So let me just ask you, in this case, let's just do a little exercise in ethical reasoning for a minute. Let's just take it as a datum that the Ephraimites are using goal-based reasoning. What is the goal that they are trying to accomplish, which they will use to justify evil means? What is the goal? There's not necessarily one single right answer. Maybe there's more than one goal, but just based on what you know about the book of Joshua and what's going on here, what is the goal or goals that they would be trying to accomplish? Okay, very good. You can get taxes from people who are working in your land. Okay, what else? tired of war. Well, we've already been fighting for a few years here. We don't want to do it anymore. We'd rather just settle down. Isn't this supposed to be the promised land? Can't you just hear them saying, God promised we'd get rest. So let's go ahead and have it. What else? I think there's a big one in the verse that we haven't mentioned yet. What does it say there in the verse? Labor. Yeah. Say that last part again. Yeah, there you go. So can you just hear them saying, if you have to play in your mind, how would they justify this? Maybe they said something like, these people are a lot more help to us here than they are if we drive them out. And so on the face of it, a lot of these arguments have some plausibility. There's only one problem with those arguments, is that they all go against God's will. And so it doesn't matter how many plausible advantages a person can show associated with disobedience. If it is disobedience, that supersedes all of the plausible advantages. So what we're saying is goal-based reasoning is wrong. You do your obligation. And within your obligation, there might be a whole lot of goals that can be accomplished. For example, I'm sure that Joshua had a lot of leeway in terms of weaponry and how to arm the people. God didn't specify every single detail about how they were to take the land. So wherever God hadn't dictated, Joshua can say, let's do this in the best way to accomplish the goal. But the goal is what God had given them. And they had to follow whatever prescriptions he had given, and that would include driving out all the people. Okay? Right. So that does, the way it's translated gives you an indication of what's on their mind. And in this case, who is the person who's really in charge of this land? Is it us so that we can take tax money or forced labor out of whoever we want, or is God in charge and he sets the agenda for how we govern? And that's certainly right. Okay. Right. 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 And there is in terms of human reasoning about military operations, there's a certain plausibility to it, where you give them the option of, like the Quran does, you can live the way we want you to live, or you can pay us money, or we'll kill you. Which one do you want? Now, in this case, the Israelites didn't show any concern for these people living right. That's another problem. There's no indication that they said, we'll let you stay in the land. We know we're really not supposed to, but we'll let you stay in the land as long as you will worship our God. Just convert. They didn't even show that they were interested in that. Yes, and there was provision for that under the law of Moses for people to be proselytes. But here, this is even worse in a way than what you have in the Quran, because they're not trying to correct the idolatry. They're just saying, you live here, but you live here on the condition that you do the labor we want you to do and pay the tax that we want you to pay. So it's a terrible situation. You may just read over it and say, well, that's a minor thing. Okay, they live in the land, forced labor, whatever. But if you think that way, then you're going to confront the consequences very quickly. Few openings over in your Bible when you get to the book of Judges, and then you see what a disaster all that is in the first 2 chapters of the book of Judges, right away. Okay, anything else about chapter 16 before we move on and try to cover a little bit longer chapter 17? Okay, let's get into Manasseh's inheritance here. Now this was the lot for the tribe of Manasseh, for he was the firstborn of Joseph. To Machir, the firstborn of Manasseh, the father of Gilead, were allotted Gilead and Bashan, because he was a man of war. And when we say the firstborn got this, that means his group, his family. So we're operating under a patriarchal understanding where you give the land to the family based on the father. But that in itself is going to be contested here in just a minute, because there's a group of ladies who are going to be displaced, and they will make arrangements, as we see. So the lot made for the rest of the sons of Manasseh according to their families, for the sons of Abiezer, and for the sons of Helek, and for the sons of Azriel, and for the sons of Shechem, and for the sons of Hepher, and for the sons of Shemitah. These were the male descendants of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, according to their families. However, Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, had no sons, only daughters. And these are the names of his daughters: Mahlah and Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They came near before Eleazar the priest, and before Joshua the son of Nun, and before the leaders, saying, "The Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our brothers." So according to the command of the Lord, and I put the reference to it back to Numbers 27, where the command was given. So according to the command of the Lord, he gave them an inheritance among their father's brothers. Thus there fell 10 portions to Manasseh, besides the land of Gilead and Bashan, which is beyond the Jordan. And remember, half of Manasseh was the Transjordan tribe. So really, here in chapter 17, we're only dealing with half of the tribe of Manasseh. Verse 6, because the daughters of Manasseh received an inheritance among his sons, and the land of Gilead belonged to the rest of the sons of Manasseh. The border of Manasseh ran from Asher to Michmethath, which was east of Shechem. Then the border went southward to the inhabitants of En-Tappuah. The land of Tappuah belonged to Manasseh, but Tappuah on the border of Manasseh belonged to the sons of Ephraim. The border went down to the brook of Cana, southward of the brook. These cities belonged to Ephraim among the cities of Manasseh. And that's an interesting thing there, isn't it? So some of this is taken by, it's Ephraim's land, but for some reason Manasseh got it. So just keep your ears open about that. Okay, I think we got through verse 10. In Issachar and in Asher, Manasseh had Beth-shean and its towns, and Ibleam and its towns. Now there's something that happens there. In these other tribes, Manasseh got some towns. And the inhabitants of Dor and its towns, and the inhabitants of Endor and its towns, and the inhabitants of Taanach and its towns, and the inhabitants of Megiddo and its towns. The third is Naphath. But the sons of Manasseh could not take possession of these cities, because the Canaanites persisted in living in that land. It came about when the sons of Israel became strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. Okay, there's the same problem here. So Ephraim and Manasseh both do this same dastardly thing. Now we come to verse 14, and we'll try to read through the end of the chapter here and then make a few comments. Then the sons of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, "Why have you given me only one lot and one portion for an inheritance, since I am a numerous people, whom the Lord has thus far blessed?" Joshua said to them, "If you are a numerous people, go up to the forest and clear a place for yourself there in the land of the Perizzites and of the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you." The sons of Joseph said, "The hill country is not enough for us, and the Canaanites who live in the valley land have chariots of iron, both those who are in Beth-shean and its towns, and those who are in the valley of Jezreel." Joshua spoke to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, saying, "You are a numerous people and have great power. You shall not have one lot only, but the hill country shall be yours. For though it is a forest, you shall clear it, and to its farthest borders it shall be yours. For you shall drive out the Canaanites, even though they have chariots of iron, and though they are strong. Okay, well, what's going on here? They say, you're not giving us enough land. And Joshua says, oh, yes, I am. And they say, oh, no, I mean, some of this land you're giving us is still populated by the locals. And Joshua says, exactly. You're just supposed to go drive them out. And they could not see that their lot included the valley of Jezreel, which still today is called the breadbasket of Israel. This is the most fertile place. This is excellent land. But all they could do was complain because they thought, well, our land is too hard for us to take. And does that strike a chord about the attitude that sometimes we may be tempted to have, where we think that our lives are not as blessed as they really are? Maybe we're not thankful the way we should be, and we start to count our problems instead of counting our blessings. And obviously we do have problems. We're not minimizing that, but we do want to properly estimate the blessings that we have. The passage that comes to my mind when I think of it, and you may want to add another passage to it, but 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18, where the Apostle Paul says that this light affliction, which is but for a moment, works for us an exceeding and eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Well, you may say, light affliction, my affliction is not light, but by comparison to the reward that we have in heaven, it is very light. In fact, it's just infinitesimally small compared to everlasting life in heaven, when you really appreciate how big that is. But even beyond that, what about the blessings that are present in this life, which we should appreciate more than we do? And I certainly count myself in that category too, where we should be able to obey the commands of Philippians about rejoicing evermore and being thankful for everything, according to Ephesians 5:20, that in everything we give thanks, even when we're going through some type of a problem. Maybe somebody in here who's been through a lot more problems than I have, but who has been faithful throughout all that, could speak to it better than I could. I'm sure that's true. But this just called to mind that these people are not grateful. They're not even thankful enough for the land to take it. So it shows a very weak attitude, very mistrustful of God, and very ungrateful for what God has given them. So think about that for a minute. Also, think about this claim. They're talking about what a great group they are in terms of number. We have so many people. But when you actually go back and look at the census at the end of Numbers, Judah was way bigger than they were. Now, combined, they were great, but there were tribes greater than the individual tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, to be sure. So they seem to have had an outsized opinion of what they deserved. But we could tend that way too, couldn't we? We could say, I'm really important. You ought to get out of my way. Give me what I want. Do you know who you're dealing with? If we're not careful, we can have that attitude. And that you might think of Bible characters you want to bring up who would exemplify that. Maybe the rich fool in Luke 18 who just wanted to tear down his barns and build bigger barns because he thought that he was the most important. Didn't want to share with anybody else. That's basically how Ephraim and Manasseh are acting in our passage. Okay? Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. That's right. Right. Jesus said, not even when a man possesses an abundance does his life consist in the things that he has. And so they just have the wrong concept. Their concept of the worthiness of their inheritance is just about the size of their plot of land. And they're not thinking about that this is a spiritual kingdom. God's not setting up Israel to be the mightiest country in the world. That's not the point. It's a land he's giving them so that they can offer sacrifices to him and prepare for the Messiah to come. They just don't have that concept. They're not respectful of God's wishes. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Now, and here's the interesting thing. He said they're not seeing the peace that God's offering them. Think about how much better off they would be if they went ahead and finished the job. Then they wouldn't have to deal with all the problems that come around later. If they go ahead and take their medicine right now and drive out these people, they will have the rest that they're trying to get. But instead, they want the rest right now. So that's a time preference. And there are a lot of people in our society today who have a foolish time preference. And they do studies about this, where people will take some benefit that's much smaller than what they could have because they can have it right now. And it's sad to see that. But people don't want to save up. People don't want to invest. People want to charge everything to their credit card and make a lot of foolish decisions about the present just because they want things right now. And that's not a responsible way to live, financially speaking. But here, spiritually speaking, if someone says, I want all of my benefits, I want all my pleasure right now. You suppose there are cases where people get into unwise relationships in their teenage years, and there's fornication involved, all kinds of consequences, psychological consequences that last a long time, and they wanted something right then that God said would be a great blessing if they would put it off, if they would do it in the context where it was approved. And so we need to tell our young people that this is something that's great for you, but it's got to be at the time when God says. Otherwise, there are going to be severe consequences. And not that a person can't be forgiven for all that. Not that your life can't be great after that. We understand any sin we commit can be forgiven. But there are some sins that do have potentially severe long-term consequences. And we have to be realistic and face that. That's just the truth, isn't it? Okay? Someone want to bring up a Bible character who would exemplify the attitude that the Ephraimites or the sons of Manasseh have, or someone want to say something about Zelophehad's daughters? I think that's a very interesting thing, because there was no law in the ancient world that was as attuned to the well-being of women, anything like the law of Moses. The law of Moses protected women in ways that other cultures did not. And this is just an example of this, that when women came and said, we're about to not have a place to live because all the land is being distributed to the sons of this patriarch and the sons of that patriarch, and we're cut off from male relatives, so what are we going to do? And Joshua follows up on Moses' command and makes sure they have a place. So that's exactly right. That's exactly what should happen. And when I think about the New Testament parallel to that, wouldn't that be 1 Timothy 5 and the discussion of what you do in the church with widows whose families will not take care of them? That happens sometimes in the church. We don't have as much of a problem in our society because of social programs that fund like Social Security and Medicare and things like that that take care of, and we got all kinds of public housing and so forth. So there aren't cases as much in our society, but in other countries, churches do set up a program for widows who are uncared for, and they follow the prescription of 1 Timothy 5. You should go back and read it. We won't take the time to do it since we only have 5 minutes, but go back and look at 1 Timothy 5's qualifications. And it's like God's Social Security program for the ladies who are not cared for. That's basically the same thing that's going on here in Joshua 17. And it just shows God always cared for the orphans and the widows, those who were not, whose needs were not being met. Okay? What else? So someone tell me something from the Bible somewhere else. You see what I'm doing? I'm just trying to say, how does this resonate with overall Bible teaching, what we're seeing in this passage? So this is your chance to jump in there and get some bonus points by bringing something like that up. Okay. How so?
Portion that was allotted to him, he wanted his brothers also, and was willing to do no good to get him.
Right, okay, so in the case of Cain and Abel, Abel had not done anything offensive toward Cain. All Abel did was just follow instructions, and Cain hated his brother because God approved him. And instead of saying, well, I should just follow Abel's example and worship exactly the way God told me to, and then everything will go well for me. Instead, he arrogantly disobeyed and pridefully slew his brother. And really, what's the expression? You bite your nose to spite your face. That he really hurt himself for the rest of it. It was a tragedy just for him, regardless of whatever happened to Abel. It really hurt Cain because of the punishment that he got. And this is just going to hurt them. They're mad at their other brethren because they think they're being cheated out of some land, but they're really not, and they're really just going to hurt themselves by leaving all these Canaanites in the land. You do realize that these are the seeds that will eventually produce Jerusalem being burned and the temple being razed to the ground. The seeds planted by the failures of the tribes of driving out all the Canaanites will result in captivity and destruction. And eventually, in year 70 after Jesus came, the Romans would destroy the temple and it would be no more because these people broke this covenant. But they did it at the instigation of the Canaanites. Now, one other thing. They should have learned already that these tribes in this part of the world and their idolatry were very addictive to them. And when I say they should have learned it already, we already passed Numbers 25. In Numbers 25, 24 and 25, the Israelites, at the instigation of Balaam and the Moabites, worshiped Baal, and 25,000 Israelites died as a result of the punishment for that. So don't you think they should have stepped back and said, we just can't let any of these tribes live? And remember, we did it. We may need to repeat some of this, but we did it earlier in our study where we talked about how terrible the idol worship and its accompanying sexual depravity, child sacrifice, and stuff like that. We talked about all that earlier. We may bring it back up, but we need to remind ourselves that these are insidiously vicious people where wicked practices that are almost unspeakable had been normalized and inculcated into their regular practice so that they just had to be eradicated from the land and driven out or killed. So this is something where the Israelites would be tempted to embark on that same practice, and they eventually did. Okay, last word. Right. The comment is hindsight is 20/20, but only if we're willing to look back and see what's happened. And some of them were and some of them weren't. The prophets were very good about calling the people to remember how bad idolatry had been and the consequences for that. But that's right. And to support your point, 1 Corinthians 10 says that these things happened as an example for us. So it would behoove us to study about it too. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you next week.